Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome into the Nittany Lion Sports Report right here on Bob Long Sports with Bob Long and Tyler Gehlhaus. And, well, as you can read behind us, the message is win out and hope for help. Why, you ask? Well, the Nittany Lions lost a heartbreaker on the road at Ohio Stadium against the Ohio State Buckeyes. Again, Bob Long here, Tyler Gehlhaus here to break all of it down for you, and we'll have Cory Giger on at 8:05, so just a few minutes away, on from the Altoona Mirror, as well as 1450 ESPN Radio in State College, 1430 ESPN Radio in Altoona. He does Sports Central on your drive home. But Tyler, before we get Cory on, first visceral takeaways, first just from the insides, what are you feeling today as not only the co-host of this show, but as I know you are a Nittany Lion football fan?
Today I'm feeling better than I did Saturday at about 7 o'clock and through the rest of that night. Heartbreak was my initial feeling. I did pick Ohio State to win the game by 1. I think I said 28-27. There was a lot of optimism from the start of the game, from the Barkley return to the Koa Farmer fumble recovery, 14-0 lead after McSorley found Hamilton. And then even going, we were up 28-10 at one point. The Nittany Lions were halftime lead up 11. It just felt like, and then Penn State even had a 15-point lead. Things were looking promising after the Sharif Miller fumble recovery from J.T. Barrett with I think about 11 minutes left. So it's obviously a heartbreaking loss for fans of Penn State, obviously for the coaches, for the team. But it shouldn't come as much surprise to anybody that Ohio State won the game. They were 6-point favorites. I think the teams are both incredibly evenly matched in many areas. I think the one area that Ohio State proved to be more dominant was in the offense and defensive lines.
Which wins a lot of football games.
Especially when it comes down to that. And in every other area, they're pretty similar teams in terms of athletes. And, Penn State had some crucial injuries in that game. They lost Ryan Buchholz on the first defensive play. They were already a little thin depth-wise at defensive end, losing Torrance Brown earlier this year. And then the Ryan Bates injury hurt them as well, and he went down in the third quarter. He did come back for a little bit, but then was replaced permanently for the game. The two areas where they could really least afford to lose people outside of McSorley, Barkley, and Gesicki were probably both lines where they're still lacking depth, and you could argue maybe still post-sanctioned depth at those line positions because it takes a while to really build them up.
And we were talking for long portions of this year about the depth on the defensive line and how without Torrance Brown, after he went down, he had guys like Ryan Buchholz stepping up into true starting roles, Shaka Toney in third down, pure passing situations, able to pin the ears back and just go after it on a pass rush. What you saw in this particular game is Sharif Miller having to take on a huge portion of that load. Tyler, almost 80% of the snaps he was out there. And then of course, Shaka Toney, the undersized freshman end, playing just a tad under 50% of the snaps. That was never the idea for this team, and it's very unfortunate that it went that route because it's a big portion of why this team ran out of gas in the second half.
Lack of pass rush.
Specifically in the fourth quarter, J.T. Barrett able to sit there in the pocket, pick whoever he wanted to throw to, no rush whatsoever, and that was a big portion of and a big reason why they lost.
Yeah, and I actually thought the key to the game for Penn State was to make Barrett beat Penn State with his arm. I thought that was Penn State's best chance. I didn't want him to beat Penn State with his legs. We know he's a talented runner, but his throwing has always been extremely questionable, especially against good defenses. The problem is it kind of was shades of the Rose Bowl last year against USC. There was no pass rush. I mean, our cornerbacks did not play the best game. I would like to point out, very impressive game from Troy Apke.
Yeah,
that was very solid showing from him. Also, Koa Farmer, I thought, had a great game as well. But the pass rush, it doesn't help a defensive backfield when there's no pass rush. And that's no knock on Miller. That's no knock on Toney. It's no knock on any of the guys. The fact of the matter is they were playing more downs than they ever have before. And frankly, all Shaka Toney is at this point in his career is a pass rush specialist. Third and long type of guy that's just going to go in there for fresh legs. And like you said, he played more football in that game than he has his whole career. plays-wise. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate the injuries that happened and the lack of depth right now at those positions. Torrance Brown, as we said, and Buckholz both out with injury. So, and the guys behind them are both freshmen as well. Miller's a sophomore, and then Tony's a redshirt freshman. And then behind them you have Etor Gross-Matos as a true freshman, and Shane Simmons as a redshirt freshman. So plenty of youth, and that's the kind of thing that in a couple years it'll be a strength for the Nittany Lions.
Shane Simmons, a DeMatha guy, by the way. I called him a couple years back when LaSalle went down to Washington, D.C. to play them. But the depth and the youth that they had to tap into earlier than they wanted to, I think that was a big reason why this Penn State Nittany Lions team struggled, and especially down the stretch there against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And that fourth quarter, Tyler, clearly is when the game was decided, and a big portion of that reason was simply the snaps that defense was out there on the field, and the fact that the defensive line just was no match, especially with those young guys taking the amount of snaps that they were. But right now we're going to turn our attention to our guest for the evening. His name is Cory Giger. You may recognize him from the Altoona Mirror, and of course he was on our show earlier this year, so we appreciate him coming back. Cory, a tough one out there in Columbus, Ohio. What were your immediate, your visceral, your first takeaways from this game?
Well, there are two, really, Bob. Appreciate you having me on. First and foremost, watching the game, okay, Ohio State's the better team. If you watch that game, play after play after play, the number of plays that were won by Ohio State versus the number of plays that were won by Penn State, Ohio State is the better team. Now, Penn State should have won the game, because the better team doesn't always win the game, because Ohio State was making a lot of mistakes. They were shooting themselves in the foot with turnovers, just mistakes in all facets of the game, and that allowed Penn State to get a big lead, even though Penn State wasn't doing a lot of really good things on either side of the ball. So the reason I started off by saying Ohio State's the better team, I'm not trying to make it seem like that makes it any easier to accept a loss, but the longer you let a good team hang around and hang around and hang around, especially in football, the better team is going to win. If those teams played 10 times in Columbus, Ohio State wins 8 or 9 of them. Penn State got a lead and was in a good position, but ultimately as the game went on and Ohio State stopped making all those mistakes, they really just started dominating on both sides of the ball.
Can you hear me? Hey, Cory, this is Tyler. Quick question. You mentioned that the Penn State couldn't close out the game. There's a lot of finger pointing going around, whether it was the defense that couldn't close it out, whether it was the offense that couldn't get enough first downs to close it out, whether it was the coaching. Just interested to get your input on maybe not who's at fault, but what it really came down to at the end.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of blame to go around, like James Franklin said. He's absolutely right. The offense didn't do enough. The defense didn't do enough. A couple things here that I'll point out at first. Penn State has a really good offense. Penn State has an offense with a lot of weapons that can score a lot of points. And you know what? That offense is going to help Penn State win 10, 11 games a lot of years. So before we all overreact about how bad things were Saturday, they have a program offensively, a scheme offensively, that's going to let them beat most teams that they face. However, they can't run the ball against a good defensive team, not consistently and not in the trenches. So Penn State can score a bunch of points in a bunch of different ways, but when they play an elite defense, and we're talking about if you want to win the Big Ten consistently, you've got to go through Ohio State. If you want to win a national title, you're going to have to go through Alabama. Penn State can score 35, 40 points on all these teams, but if you can't run the ball consistently year in and year out, you're going to have a tough time beating the Ohio States or the Alabamas and taking that very next step. So if you follow what I'm saying, Penn State's perfectly good enough to win 10 or 11 games, But once you start winning 10 or 11 games, then the expectations start to become, or you're the number 2 team in the country, the expectations are, hey, could they beat Alabama? They couldn't come close to beating Alabama. Not close. Not remotely close. Alabama would destroy them on both sides of the ball at the line of scrimmage, because that's what Alabama does to everyone. We saw that Penn State's offensive line is not very good. They can score a lot of points in a lot of different ways with scrambling and getting people on the edge and throwing the ball deep, but if they have to rely on getting 3 and 4 and 5 yards at a time on the ground, that's not what this Penn State offense is designed to do. And then defensively, they couldn't get any pressure. Those linemen, they could not get pressure on Barrett. He had all day to throw, and he dissected them. So, you add both those factors up, it's not like this is the end of the world. They lost by 1 point, and they probably should have won the game. But there were a lot of lessons to be learned about things that the program needs to get better at if they indeed truly expect to be a national championship caliber program.
Cory Giger on with us here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Cory, it's a great window into the second half of the show, because what we're going to talk about at length, you can call it a fun exercise. It could also be pulling teeth, but we're going to go through a potential route to the college football playoff. But some of the teams you mentioned, Alabama specifically, saying that they would essentially wipe the floor with Penn State. So where does Alabama and potentially even a Georgia compare to the 2 teams that we saw on Saturday afternoon on Fox?
Well, it's Alabama and it's everybody else, and I actually think Alabama's going to wipe the floor with Georgia in the SEC title game. We'll see how that goes, and that will help determine if Georgia gets in or not, because if Alabama beats Georgia by 7 or 10 points, then you can absolutely make the case that Georgia deserves to be in the top 4. If Alabama rolls Georgia by 20, well, then obviously you've got a serious issue there, and that might not be Georgia out. Now, the problem becomes Notre Dame will be the best one-loss team, okay? But Georgia beat Notre Dame. So everybody thinking that Notre Dame's going to get in, well, Georgia beat them. And, well, what about Oklahoma? The Big 12 has yet to get a team in the college football playoff the past couple of years. That's got to change. That league is going to go berserk if they are left out again. And Oklahoma beat Ohio State. So that certainly bodes well in their favor. But does that mean you leave out Ohio State as the Big Ten champion? That's going to be hard to do. So, hey, look, there's a lot of games left to be played in all these conferences, but there's certainly going to be a dilemma. I like to think Penn State is still in the discussion, but they need some things to happen with some of these other teams slipping up. They need Alabama to crush Georgia. They need some other teams in these power conferences to lose maybe one more time, and then they would still have very, very much a shot.
So it's an interesting and delicate question I'm about to ask, because, and I'm sure you've heard it as much as we have here, fans looking for somebody to blame, and talked about a little bit at the top when you came on, but it's almost crazy to ask. But when you look at the last 10 minutes of that football game, and the respective levels of football that those programs were playing at the time, and the fact that Ohio had so much left in the tank, and you did feel and see that Penn State was hanging on. So for the folks that are saying Penn State, they needed to win that game, how could they have won that game in the last 5 minutes?
You get the ball on that last possession with 4.5 minutes to go, and you have better play calling. Here's where
Just the play calling. You think that?
Well, see, it's not that easy. No, I was going to explain a little bit.
Sure.
There are a lot of factors. The offensive line was getting destroyed. So there's a chance that no matter what Joe Moorhead calls, the offensive line was going to get blown up. But the first play is the easiest play in the world for Ohio State to defend. It's a handoff directly to Saquon Barkley, standing still, and the Ohio State defensive player tackled both Barkley and McSorley at the same time. That's how ill-conceived of a play call that was, and how bad Penn State's offensive line was playing at that time. What I already said, Bob, was Ohio State's the better team.
Right.
They were controlling that game. Joe Moorhead needed to see that, and he needed to pull some smoke and mirrors plays to get 2 first downs. See what I'm saying?
Sure.
I love Joe Moorhead. I think Joe Moorhead is one of the most important factors for why Penn State is back to national prominence. They were playing an archaic offense for 25 years for the most part before Joe Moorhead brought an innovative scheme into play. So he should have realized that offensive line was not going to be able to do anything. So you roll Trace McSorley out. You get him going around the edge. You get Tommy Stevens in the game. You get Miles Sanders and Saquon Barkley in the game at the same time. You do something other than turn around and hand the ball off to your running back that 109,000 people in the stadium knew exactly what was coming, and he gets tackled for a 7-yard loss, and basically that ends your chances for the whole night. So it's hard for me to be overly critical of Joe Moorhead, but he failed to realize the situation in the game right there. He called the most basic play in football when you're trying to eat clock, and it blew up in their face because they weren't prepared to block Ohio State there. So does that
Sure.
sound like I'm placing all the blame on Joe Moorhead? I'm not.
Right.
Their offensive line couldn't get the job done. I'm just saying that they should have been prepared. They were up big, because of a few big plays and throughout the night. If they'd have had just a couple of more, offbeat kinds of calls or whatever tricks up their sleeve they might have had, that may have gotten them those 2 first downs that they needed.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. That's the only reason I brought it up is there were other deficiencies, which you certainly noted. And I heard one interesting one. I love the creativity that you threw out there with Tommy Stevens and maybe even Miles Sanders. That would have been, I'll give him creative and daring had he gone that route, especially at that time in the game. But one thing that I had heard, and again, the blocking wasn't there to begin with, but when it comes to Saquon Barkley not getting the ball going downhill, could they have mixed it up with the wrinkle they showed against Michigan and snap the ball directly to Saquon Barkley?
And again, this is what everything we're talking about, Bob and Tyler, all comes back to a couple of key points, which I first started. Ohio State, that if you're not willing to accept that Ohio State is the better team, then all of the rest of this you might as well not even listen to. Ohio State's the better team, and on a play-by-play basis, on just a basic play, they were winning most of those plays. So Penn State needed to come up with different kinds of plays to shift the balance a little bit. Instead, Joe Moorhead came up with a couple of basic plays that weren't working all night. They haven't worked for several weeks, and you needed them to work there, and they didn't get done. So that's why I started off at the very beginning saying Ohio State's a better team, and the longer you let a better team hang around without doing different things yourself, ultimately they're going to beat you.
Yeah, Cory, I was a little surprised by the way the offensive line played, in not a good way. But again, they're going against probably the best defensive line. They were right up there with Clemson in terms of the best defensive lines in college. They have NFL guys, 1 through 4, and even the backups, really, if you ask me. So I was just a little surprised, though, because we have a lot of returning starters on that offensive line. Granted, they're still young, with Fries now starting at right tackle. He's a redshirt freshman, and then there's only one senior in the group, and that's Mann. So I don't know if it's an inexperienced thing. I don't know if this is something that we should anticipate the line getting better next year as pretty much everyone comes back, and the year after that. What are your thoughts on the offensive line moving forward? Is it just because they were young and manhandled by Ohio State, or is it a real cause for concern here?
That's $64,000 question. Now, they get Ryan Bates hurt, and he's their best lineman. So they were in scramble mode a little bit. But, hey, injuries happen on the offensive line. You got to be ready for it. So the bigger answer to that question, and why that question I think is fascinating, again, let me just start by saying that offensive line, the way it's playing, can win 10 or 11 games a year. Because Joe Moorhead's offense doesn't necessarily need that offensive line to be sensational to score 30 points on most people. So what we're talking about here is how do you beat the big boys? How do you beat the behemoths and line up and knock them off the ball? I don't think Penn State is built for that. I don't think Penn State is going to be built for that. I don't think this offensive scheme is built for that. I don't think the program development is built for that. So my answer to your question, Tyler, is I don't think it's going to happen. Now, is that the end of the world? No, because they can still beat most people with the way they do things. But if you can't blow people off the ball, there are always going to be certain teams that you're pretty much just not going to beat. Wisconsin blows people off the ball. It is a Wisconsin staple for decades. They're going to line up, and they're going to kick your ass. They're going to punch you in the face, and they're going to knock you off the ball. This offense relies on Joe Moorhead reading the defense, getting into the right play, taking advantage of a mismatch, letting Trace McSorley read the defense, call a run or a pass, outsmart the defense, take advantage of a loophole here. The offense is just not designed to line up and bust the other team off the ball. And so I don't know that it's ever going to be like that. But again, I'll say this for the fifth time. It doesn't have to be like that to win 10 games.
Right.
It just has to be like that to beat the 5 teams that you're going to have to beat to win a national title.
Cory Giger here on with us from the Altoona Mirror from 1450 ESPN Radio State College, 1430 ESPN Radio in Altoona. Cory, I'm very interested, and you have such a unique vantage point. We said this the last time you were on, and that you get to talk directly to the people, the folks that call your radio station up. You're not like a podcast where you're taking, questions that are texted or emailed in, but you are talking to the Penn State constituency. What did you hear today?
Yeah, a lot of frustration, a lot of, hey, they should have won that game got away. Because everything we're talking about, it doesn't matter if Ohio State's a better team. Penn State still should have won the game. They're up 15 points in the fourth quarter. So I heard from a lot of people today who were very frustrated that they have the best running back in program history. And outside of one carry, he had 8 yards on 20 carries. There's a lot of people here that I talked to today that called in, and we talked about these exact same topics, the reasons why with the offensive line, that kind of stuff. But I think people here understand that Penn State's a good football team, and they understand this is still going to be a magical season compared to where they were 2, 3, 4 years ago. But what happens, Bob, is when you start to get good, everybody else's expectations start to change and rise, and meeting those expectations becomes a very, very difficult challenge. It's one thing to become good. It's another thing to take that very next step to become great. And that's one thing I heard from from the fans today on my show.
Hey, Cory, real quick, you talked about Saquon Barkley's 8 yards on 20 carries outside of the long touchdown run. I was a little surprised they didn't try to get him the ball in space a little more, especially in the pass game. He was successful on a screen early on a 3rd and 10, and he got the first down. I would have liked to see him used in the pass game, whether it was a screen, whether it was a wheel route, whether it was a just basic short pass, getting him the ball, a swing pass. I thought that if they got him the ball in space, that's where he's best doing his damage, especially with the offensive line. And he's not best inside the tackles with this offensive line, unfortunately. He's best when he gets out in space. I was a little surprised they didn't try to get him involved more in the passing game.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And again, it's a difficult question for me simply because Joe Moorhead is the reason why they are so good. But Joe Moorhead had a bad night. He had a really bad night. He had to take advantage of everything you just said. He had to get Saquon in space. He didn't do it. He had to get some different alignments on the field. He didn't do it. He had to make better play calls in certain situations. He didn't do it. So when you guys asked earlier about who's ultimately to blame, well, there's a lot of things and reasons to blame. But, yeah, as that night's playing out, again, why in the world would we not see Tommy Stevens out there for one play? That makes no sense whatsoever. Why in the world would we not see some new wrinkles and rolling out more to make sure there's more time? These are easy things to point out that even novices like us can point out. Joe Moorhead is an offensive genius. I'm scratching my head wondering why he couldn't figure these things out Saturday.
Cory Giger on with us from the Altoona Mirror. One last question for you, and Tyler brought this point up off air, and I thought it was a really good one. Before the season, there were at least a decent faction of folks out there that had Penn State making the college football playoff, and those same people had them potentially losing this game to Ohio State. And certainly, granted, Michigan is a little bit less of a a top-tier team as we may have thought, but Michigan State maybe a lot better than we thought. So, is it just as time goes by? Is it something that has changed in the college football landscape since week one? Is it general nerves, or why do people think that there is absolutely no shot that Penn State makes the college football playoff at this point?
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. I ran a poll. 2/3 of the people said they really don't have a shot. I do think they have a shot. It's just
I agree with
they're
you.
They're not in the number one position right now. They need some other things to happen. They need maybe Miami or Notre Dame or Miami or Stanford to beat Notre Dame. Well, that would take Notre Dame out of the mix because Miami would probably then lose to Clemson. Well, there's one spot. They need Alabama to crush Georgia. That can potentially open up another spot. They need Oklahoma to lose to Oklahoma State, and I'm picking Oklahoma State this week.
That's in Stillwater, right?
Yeah, it is. So, I think it's frustration and short-sightedness from Penn State fans who claim they're not there. The rankings come out tomorrow. They're probably going to be 6th or 7th, I'm guessing, which means you need just a couple of things to happen. Last year, 10 things needed to happen for them to win the Big Ten.
Right.
All 10 happened. Now, that doesn't mean all these things are going to happen this year, but to say that they can't happen, I'm not going to buy into that. There's a lot of time left, and a lot of these teams still have to play tough games.
Cory, we'll hit it in the second half of the show here, but I'll throw one more into your scenarios there. I think Virginia Tech beats Miami outright this weekend and takes full control of the Coastal, and all of a sudden things look a little bit differently. Now there's a whiteboard that you can't see, but it's behind us here on our show, and it says win out and hope for help. So I think that's the mantra for the second half of the season here. We certainly appreciate your time here tonight, and we hope to catch you again here on the show before the season is finished.
Hey, anytime, Bob. Always good catching up with you, buddy. Tyler, you guys enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah,
thanks,
you too.
Cory.
It's great discussion. Thanks.
All right, see ya.
There he is, Cory Giger calling in. Great to have him on the show, as always, from the Altoona Mirror, from ESPN 1450 State College, from ESPN 1430 Altoona. And I think the point at the end is very, very valid from Cory, Tyler, and that this team truly does have a way into the college football playoff. Less things need to happen than last year.
Right.
And I think they can do it. So now, for those of you who've been watching on Facebook Live, we're going to try something new out here, Tyler. For those of you that are watching, please put a comment on there or a question or an exclamation or whatever it is you want to do. Be part of the show, and we can get you on before the end and either react to what it is you said or whatever it may be. We're excited to get the folks involved. So, again, if you have a question, does Penn State have a shot? Explain your reasoning. If not, explain your reasoning.
Right, and something to keep, like Cory said, that Penn State needed 10 things to happen last year. Important to note, Penn State in the original ranking was 12, and that was actually higher than a lot of people thought. If I remember correctly, they were the top 2-loss team, and they slowly climbed their way up. And this year they'll probably be, we'll get into it a little bit, they'll probably be in the 6 to 8 range, somewhere in there. And that's not as steep sledding climbing as it was last year, going from 12, and they had that second loss last year, which this year, barring any dramatic upset, I don't see them losing this weekend to Michigan State. Even both teams coming off of very tough emotional losses, but barring any upsets, I mean, it's going to be an 11-1 team at the end of the year. Yes, they're probably not going to play for their conference championship, which it does stink, but Ohio State didn't play for it last year.
Yeah.
I mean,
The
you could argue
difference
it's a
there-
different story. They beat Oklahoma. That is different, but but a lot is going to happen in these last 4 or 5 weeks here.
And there was one additional loss for Penn State, which likely won't be the case this year.
Right,
for
the
Ohio
two
State.
loss is really what did it in.
I totally agree. Even people are saying it was the Michigan loss last year. Totally disagree. If they had beaten Pittsburgh, they'd have one loss. It would have been round robin, beating Michigan, Ohio State beating Michigan, Michigan beating Penn State, and Penn State beating Ohio State. Then the extra data point with Wisconsin, it would have been Penn State. Not worth our breath at this point,
Right.
but I really think it was that extra loss. So let's take a live look now at the top 25, and specifically I have the top 13 up there. Alabama at number 1, Georgia at number 2. We're going to stick on the AP side for the time being. I think that's a more accurate reflection of what you'll see on Tuesday night. Again, tomorrow night they will have the first release of the college football poll. So Wisconsin sitting there at 4, Ohio State sitting there at 3. You'd think, Tyler, that one of them has to lose. Now, my thought is that it does not matter by how little or how much Wisconsin loses. I do believe that Penn State would jump Wisconsin on the last day if Wisconsin were to lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game.
Wisconsin is going to lose. It's just a matter of time. Their schedule is not very good. Their toughest game left is at home against Michigan. If Michigan is not ranked at that time, they will have gone through their regular season, I believe, without playing a ranked team all year. Assuming Ohio State takes care of business, they're going to get to the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis, where Wisconsin will definitely struggle with them. It's going to be very interesting to me to see where a team like Wisconsin, a team like Miami, two undefeated teams come out in this college football playoff ranking tomorrow night, because I think a lot of those one-loss teams are all, maybe not significantly, but they are better football teams, more battle-tested than Miami and Wisconsin right now.
And I don't think we need to worry about Miami for very long. Like I said, Tyler, I really think that Miami loses this Saturday to Virginia Tech.
Even though they're home? I mean, at Virginia Tech would definitely be a loss, in my opinion, going into Lane Stadium. Tough place to play. I just checked. Miami is home.
Yep, they are.
Not that they have the best home field advantage by any means, but it definitely gives them a better chance to win at home against Virginia Tech than on the road at Virginia Tech.
Yep, I like the Hokies. I really do. And
What's
they're
the line on
sleeper
that?
team. I don't know what the line is at this moment.
Okay.
But what I can tell you is this is a Virginia Tech team that has the one loss to Clemson. They didn't look great at that point, but they have been dispatching of teams a lot easier than Miami.
Hanging around.
Miami, when you talk about hanging around ball games they shouldn't and not putting teams away, that very, very unimpressed by this team. Remember, they had a very long break to start the season as well. One of their games with the Hurricane was canceled, so now they're still playing a little bit of catch-up. They've played one less game than everybody else. All right, let's take a look at the Notre Dame schedule, because I think this one's very interesting as well. This Miami team, coming off what I believe could be a loss at home to Virginia Tech, all of a sudden they play a Notre Dame team that is rolling with all the momentum in the world. I mean, look at these wins. The last close game was Georgia, and every other game has been very impressive from the Fighting Irish. This team is somewhat one-dimensional, with Brandon Wimbush doing more running than he is passing, but I truly think that this is a Notre Dame team that is very good, has a really good opportunity to go far this year, and I truly think that if Miami doesn't take them in that game, I think that they're going to have a tough time finding a loss, or we're going to have a tough time finding a loss for this Notre Dame team. I don't see it with Stanford. The only hope would be Bryce Love coming back. We saw what that team is without Bryce Love on Thursday night against Oregon State. It was atrocious, in a word. But I really think this Notre Dame team has a lot of good games in front of them, and I think other than maybe that Miami game, I think they'll make it all the way through. Now, if they win those 4, Tyler, I really do believe that they are in the playoff. So
this is Notre Dame.
This is the wild card here. This is Notre Dame, right? Not having the conference,
right? And they do have a tough schedule remaining. Don't even sleep on Navy. They've struggled with Navy in the past,
no doubt.
I definitely think that Miami and at Stanford will be the toughest games for them. Mm-hmm. In these last 4 weeks. They are the wild card. How do you view their one loss against Georgia by 1 point, against Penn State's one loss, assuming one loss at the end of the year, to Ohio State on the road? If you look at Notre Dame's schedule, I think it's a little tougher.
Than Penn State's?
Yes,
absolutely.
So I think that's what I think would be the difference to leapfrog. To put Notre Dame ahead. And real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, but Brett Miller said that Virginia Tech is actually favored by 3 points at Miami this week.
How about that? So not going out on a limb, but I thought I was because I didn't check the line. But something's got to be going right in there. So, again, here's a look at that Notre Dame schedule that you were talking about, Tyler. Games against ranked Georgia, who is now one of the top teams in the country. Southern Cal has fallen off, but again, that's an impressive win. NC State, I think, is going to prove to be an impressive win because, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, a big game against Clemson this weekend for an NC State team that is very, very good and was humbled on the road. Now, here's Penn State's schedule. All right. In terms of the non-conference, because now the Big Ten with the 9-game regular season schedule, I think, makes it tougher on these teams to schedule out of conference. And we talked about that early in the season with Brian Tripp. Iowa, again, not a great loss this weekend to Northwestern. That loss, unfortunately, or that win, doesn't look as good as maybe we had hoped it would.
The Iowa win.
The Iowa win.
Okay.
Although, as we'll touch very soon in the Big 12, it's Iowa State has the opportunity to be a huge disruptor in the Big 12, and
Good
we can
point.
thank Iowa.
I didn't even think of that.
We can thank Iowa for the fact that they have 2 losses and are currently out of the college football playoff discussion.
And not to mention Northwestern's starting to turn it on a little bit out in Evanston. That they could end up finishing the season, believe it or not, top 25. That's not too far out of the question here. So, I mean, really for Penn State, it's a good thing that Michigan State is still ranked to get another ranked win on Saturday, assuming they still are ranked in the college football playoff, because that is what they go off of, correct, starting Tuesday? Okay.
Yep, and so the tough part there, though, is, okay, they're sitting at 24. Penn State needs to roll teams right now if they want to find their way to the top.
And they should roll the last 3.
And they should, but Michigan State's going to have a tougher time finding their way back into the top 25 if they get rolled by Penn State. So you want the team you play to be ranked, but you have to roll them to show that at 11-1, you took care of business against everybody not named Iowa. That one was closer than it needed to be. A 1-point loss to potentially, when it's all said and done, the number 2 overall seed in the college football playoff, and everything else was a cakewalk. I mean, that's the case that Penn State needs to make, because they're not going to have it on strength of schedule. I mean, I even look at a Clemson. Let's take a look at Clemson.
They're not going to have the
now.
conference championship either, most likely.
Penn State, that is, yes. And again, we talk about this game here. Saturday, November 4th at NC State, 3:30 ABC. Huge. Absolutely huge, because NC State, if they win that game, they run away with the Atlantic Division title.
If NC State, so
because
if NC
they have
State,
not, the Notre Dame loss since they moved
and they
to
lost
the
to
ACC,
South Carolina to start the season. NC State, so
neither of those losses count as conference losses, even though Notre Dame may seem to be. So if they win this game, they are guaranteed.
Clemson,
because there's only one.
Clemson's playoff
game
hopes are
left.
gone. And this to me, outside of Bedlam, the Oklahoma State game, this is the most intriguing game for me this weekend. Actually, NC State, it's going to be interesting to see how they come off of that loss at Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame's clicking on all cylinders right now, it appears. But NC State's defensive line, their defense in general, but their defensive line is filled with NFL prospects. They got this guy, I think his name's Bradley Chubb. He's like if you haven't heard of him, you're going to hear of him come Saturday, because he's a monster. It's going to be a low-scoring game, in my opinion. Both really good defenses. Game is at NC State. They're going to be amped up for that game. This is an opportunity for NC State that they've really haven't had in a while to take a stranglehold on the division there, Coastal or Atlantic. I forget what they are in.
Which one now?
NC State, are they in the Coastal or Atlantic?
They are in Atlantic.
So they could put a stranglehold on that with a win over Clemson, because that would move Clemson to 2 losses.
Yeah.
And everyone obviously knows Florida State is out.
Right. No, Florida State's out. It's NC State and Clemson in the same division, Miami and Virginia Tech in the other.
Right.
Virginia Tech, with a win over Miami, has the foot in the door for that run to the championship. They only have the one conference loss, and that was against the Clemson Tigers. The only other game through their schedule that you really think they would have a shot to lose would be the game against Georgia Tech. And I want to take one more look at that Miami schedule, because there's a really intriguing game right at the end. Black Friday on the road at Pitt, after the gauntlet of Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, and then a lull to sleep at home against Virginia. You're coming north
to
deep in November.
Packed Heinz Field.
Well, something like that. Dress like a yellow seat night. Again, It could be cold. Those guys coming way north after 3 straight home games. Just think about it.
You never know. But I don't think Miami's going to be a player come week 4.
I don't think
that
so.
final week of this 4. I don't think they're going to be a player. It would be great for Miami if they could lose to Virginia Tech and then beat Notre Dame for Penn State's sake.
I would totally agree.
I mean,
then they're out. And
so one week we got to cheer
effort.
against the Hurricanes. The next week we're cheering for Hurricanes.
Yep. There you go. So now let's move to what I think is really the most interesting, which is the Big 12. And again, Iowa State, a huge disruptor here. There are 4 teams currently tied with 1 loss only in conference. Those 4 teams are Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, TCU, and Iowa. Now, when you look into the tiebreaker procedures at the Big 12, there's still a lot of time to go. But if, for whatever reason, all those teams were to have a tie, there were a tiebreaker between those 4 teams or even 3 teams. 1 team drops off, right? Iowa State has already played 2 of those 3 teams in this theoretical 4-game round robin, and they've won both of them.
How about that? How about Iowa State?
Is that something else?
Who would have thought?
So now there's that 38-31. They were 31-point dogs in that game less than a month ago against Oklahoma. So now you look at Oklahoma's schedule. They have 2 huge tests here, one on the road in Stillwater and the next at home against TCU. So if you are a Penn State fan, you're cheering for Oklahoma State. Why? Because when you take a look at the Oklahoma State schedule, look who's next. After Oklahoma this weekend, it's Iowa State.
And they go to Iowa State.
They go to Iowa State in Ames.
And that place is going to be absolutely rocking up there because Iowa State actually has
that could be game day that weekend
pretty
without
decent,
seeing the other
right,
games.
they have a pretty decent chance. I'm not sure the remaining of Iowa State's schedule, but they have a pretty good chance of maybe playing in that wacky Big 12 championship.
And that is the key point. And again, you're leading me to water here because this is exactly the point when it comes to this. There's craziness here, and more likely than not, there's going to be at least 1 team that goes to that championship game with only the 1 loss. Maybe it's Oklahoma, but my guess is that it's not. It might even be TCU at the end of this. But I truly believe, and have said this from the very beginning, Tyler, the Big 12 will, and I mean will, get screwed by this 13th data point that they have worked so hard for. I truly believe that.
I think you're right. I think they're going to beat each other up. And the sad part about it is they're good football teams. I mean, they're exciting football. It's an exciting brand of football if you like offense. I mean, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, TCU, they all have really good offenses. They don't play much defense. TCU's defense, I think, is okay from what I've seen. But they have tons of weapons too, and it's unfortunate for the Big 12 because I do think that they're going to be left out along with the Pac-12. Right now, Washington is in the driver's seat in the Pac-12.
Yeah,
and
we can talk about Washington.
It's interesting because they're ranked number 12 right now in the AP poll. I mean, again, college football poll comes out tomorrow, but the Pac-12 is going to have a lot of work to do too.
Yes.
And I could very well see, USC even coming out of the South and still winning the Pac-12, but with 2 losses.
That game to decide the South is this weekend, November 4th. It's Arizona against Southern Cal. They have the same amount of losses, and the winner of that game at this point in the season, almost certainly with that head-to-head, because there will be almost certainly no multi-game tiebreakers. If there is, you're looking at the team that wins that game losing another game. I just don't see that. So I think the winner of this weekend's game, Arizona Southern Cal, takes the South and faces Washington. Washington's schedule down the road is Oregon, at Stanford, Utah, and then Washington State.
And you just never know in the Pac-12. I mean, it's nuts out there. You turn on ESPN at 10:30 on Saturday night, and somehow Arizona State is beating Washington a couple weeks ago and held on to win. And I mean, nobody thought that was going to happen. The Pac-12, because they play so many games at night on Saturday late night, crazy stuff happens. So you really don't know what to expect, and that is actually why I don't think that they're going to have a representative in the college football playoff, just because of how much crazy stuff is going on out there. And same situation as the Big 12. I think they're going to beat each other up,
Yeah.
and then when you get to the championship, those teams have already played each other. They've already played. Whoever's in the championship has already played each other. It's not the Big 10 or any of these other conferences that have a South,
two divisions,
a South and a North, an
right.
East and a West. So it's going to be they're digging their own grave almost.
Totally,
and a lot of it's unintentionally. Besides, maybe they should split up and do divisions, but that's for another day.
One more point on the Pac-12. Really think the Pokes have a good shot at this as well. Now, they got to play well. But remember how I said Iowa State was in the driver's seat if there's a three-way tiebreaker in terms of getting to the conference championship game because of their 2-0 record against the three. They only have one more team to play of that top four. Well, Oklahoma State, they've only played one, and that team was TCU. You see right there on the top half of your screen. Oklahoma State, TCU beat them 44-31. So when you talk about the Pokes here, yes, TCU, they're in an okay spot, but they also lost to one of these teams as well, which was this weekend, and that was Iowa State. So the Pokes have Oklahoma left, right? And they also have
Iowa State.
So there's actually a possibility that the Oklahoma State Cowboys find themselves in a pretty good spot as well.
And you just had TCU schedule up, and
I did, yep, to show you that.
If you could pull that back
win.
up, if that's not a problem there, Bob.
No, no problem.
Because they're still technically in this thing as well, but their schedule's also very difficult.
That game this weekend is something else.
Texas is in many ways underachieved this year for a Texas standard. Granted, they're coming in with a new coach, Tom Herman, but they have been pretty much in every game they've played. They took USC to the wire in the Coliseum early on. I know that they played tough. They hung tough with Oklahoma for just about that whole game. So it's just a matter of time until they get that big win. I wouldn't be surprised if it came against TCU. I really wouldn't. I know the game is at TCU, but that's in state for Texas. They want to regain that state. It hasn't been their state for a while. They want to put their stamp on the state of Texas like it's been for so many years and really hold down the fort there in Texas.
Yep. Agreed. So, where were we? I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job of figuring out what these games are, and I jotted some of these games down.
Can we touch on the SEC?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with the Georgia Bulldogs.
Okay.
Because I'll say this, and we'll put up Alabama in just a second. Alabama losing to Auburn would be more likely than not a very bad thing for Penn State. Because if Alabama somehow loses to Auburn and Auburn beats Georgia and Auburn goes to the SEC championship, right? Because they'd only have one loss in conference.
Who's this, Auburn?
This is Auburn because their other loss was to Clemson. Then you have a game where Georgia is coming back and playing Auburn in the SEC. Now, it could work out perfectly for Penn State, but I don't think it's ideal for Auburn to win both the Georgia game and the Alabama game that you see here.
So actually, we have a question. Wade Brogdon, does his name ring a bell?
Yes, sir.
He's actually, I don't know if he's serious or not, but he's watching from Hong Kong.
Yeah, he's serious.
He is serious. How about that? I'm not sure what time it is over there, but thanks for watching, Wade. He asked Bob, how do you like Georgia? And then he says, Georgia is going to beat Bama in the SEC championship.
I love that.
And then he also says, does Georgia or Bama get in with one loss to the other? So I'm assuming he's thinking they're both undefeated going into the championship.
Yeah.
In Atlanta, playing each other head-to-head. You can go ahead and answer. I have my own opinion. I don't think Georgia's going to be undefeated going into it.
Okay,
I think going to Auburn, that's a rivalry game. I think Auburn will beat Georgia in a couple weeks here.
Okay. Well, let's go back to that graphic that we just had on the screen because I think that's important. We look at the Georgia schedule here. As they head through, they're going to take on a good Auburn team. Now, that team's going to fall to the edge of the top 25 if, like Wade is talking about, Alabama and Georgia go to the SEC championship undefeated. I think it would be unfair to drop them out of the top 25, but again, now you're looking at a 4-loss team, 8-4 Auburn. The win against Notre Dame gets better and better every week, and that goes without saying. So that's a non-conference win that I don't think Penn State has. And let's just say for discussion's sake that Georgia loses to Alabama. Penn State has obviously lost to Ohio State. Penn State doesn't get the 13th data point because they don't go to the Big Ten championship game based on the division alignment. So would Georgia get in over Penn State? The answer is I think probably, but I also think it depends on
how they would lose.
On the margin of
right.
victory.
And we talked about that earlier a little bit.
Because the SEC East is still weak. And Wade would say the same thing. We've had discussions about that in the past. And even the West this year isn't quite as good, but I still think people are overvaluing how down the SEC is, if that makes sense. I don't think the SEC is nearly as down as people are saying. LSU, they rose from the dead. Yeah, they lost to Troy.
Alabama.
That was atrocious. That's a big game this week.
Alabama, LSU. It's at Alabama though, not in Death Valley. So
yeah.
if it were at LSU, that'd be definitely upset alert.
But my answer to Wade is I think Georgia would get in over Penn State with a one possession.
And he says he
agrees
with you.
Yeah.
So. That's good to know. And these comments and questions are great. If you guys have any more, please send them in here. It's going to be these next
little stream there.
It is. These next couple of weeks are going to be packed every week because things are probably going to be changing.
Yeah.
So
the games to watch.
Sure.
If we can do this, the games to watch this weekend: Clemson against NC State. We talked about that already. NC State has not lost a conference game. Let me say that one more time. Notre Dame does not count as a conference loss, even though they are essentially a member of the ACC based on the move from Jack Schwarbrick and the Notre Dame Athletic administration there. So with that win, North Carolina State would punch their ticket. That's right. There are not enough games for NC State to lose and drop behind Clemson at that point. They would punch their ticket to the ACC championship game. Virginia Tech at Miami this weekend changes the entire way of that division as well and puts them in the driver's seat. Miami at Notre Dame next week with a Miami loss. The best thing that they could do is beat Notre Dame. That would take the Fighting Irish out. And let's extend Wade's question. Let's say Notre Dame were to win out and Georgia loses by 7 points against Alabama in the SEC championship game. There's no issue about a conference not getting a representative. For example, a one-loss Ohio State from the Big Ten or a Georgia. I think you'd pick Ohio State at that point. But with Notre Dame, you're not spurning any particular conference, plus the head-to-head.
Right.
It was in South Bend. I don't think there's any way you could leave Georgia out. The other thing I haven't mentioned. I'm sorry, you got something you're going to say.
Oh, I do. I have another viewer.
And this is a big one. Oklahoma is going to come in tomorrow ahead of Penn State. And it's for the same reason we talked about earlier. Their loss was to a 31-point underdog Iowa State. Iowa State is a hell of a lot different than they were on October the 7th.
Right.
So,
but that's a thing.
And that's
it. Does the committee go off of when you played that team or where that team is now?
I think you got to look at it holistically. And truly what that means is Iowa State a good team? I mean, a big portion of the reason that Iowa State wasn't ranked at the time is based on preseason rankings, which mean nothing.
Right.
And the fact that
that's fair assessment.
The new quarterback has come in and done a great job.
Great story too. I'm not sure if you've heard it.
Which is that I have.
Yeah.
I have. The went to junior college for a long time. Yeah. So that's actually going to help Iowa State's case, and maybe they could make a fringe argument if the whole world falls apart to say, yeah, we have 2 losses, but
could you imagine that?
We don't have 1 loss with our current starting quarterback. Look at how we've changed. So anyways, Oklahoma is going to jump up real high just like Ohio State will tomorrow night.
We have Ryan Gorman had a question. Actually, it's an opinion. It's actually a pretty solid opinion. He says, in my opinion, it would be too late for a Georgia, because if Georgia plays Alabama in the conference championship,
and then
Georgia loses
that Tuesday.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's a very fair point.
Sunday.
He said,
"Excuse me, I'm sorry, that's Sunday."
He said,
morning.
unfortunately for Georgia, ultimately it wouldn't be best for the playoff to have a game played again a couple of weeks later, rematch in sense. And I agree. That's an interesting point, especially if it would be the 1 versus 4 matchup.
Right. It is.
So
that's
a definitely interesting point there.
It is a good point. Now, do you think that's how they make the decision, though?
Possibly.
I mean, the directive is to pick the 4
Unfortunately,
best teams. Will they do it?
Because then Alabama could have an argument like, if it is a close game, well, we beat them in the regular season. Why do we have to beat them again? It's hard to beat a team twice. It's very hard to beat a team twice. You see it in the NFL.
Yeah.
It's hard to beat a team twice, and then Alabama could be.
Who are the best 4 teams?
That's what it comes down to. That maybe they could reshuffle a seed here and there, like the
Right.
3 and the 4 if they're really
Like
if it's
the
a
old,
toss-up.
like the old Major League Baseball postseason when they had the 4 teams and the wild card came from the same division as the top overall record holder. They would mix up the matchups so they didn't have to play each other.
Right.
I mean, I don't think that would happen here, but
So you mentioned you think Oklahoma is going to be above Penn State a little bit.
I mean,
why wouldn't Oklahoma
why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they be above Ohio State?
Right, especially when that Iowa State win. That Iowa State this weekend against TCU put themselves on the map and put themselves right at the top because they took TCU from undefeated to 1 loss in conference. They put themselves back on top of the Big 12, leveled the playing field among those 4 teams, and showed the world that this Iowa State team is playing as good a football as anybody right now. And thereby, you abridge your opinion of Ohio State. It's a pendulum, or maybe it's a game of pulleys and ladders, right? Where everything's changing, not just your profile, but that of all the other teams across college football. Oklahoma is going to benefit significantly, and they're going to be the top-rated team in the Big 12 as they have been. But
they have to win on Saturday.
Here, let's look back at this top 13 one more time, right? Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Notre Dame. Honestly, right now, with the way Iowa State has proven themselves, I would put Oklahoma 5th. Maybe even 4th if the argument you're making about why not put them above Ohio State. I don't know. I don't have a good reason, but I believe that they're at least top 5 right now, and if the season ended, the committee would be hard-pressed not to – and, Wisconsin and Ohio State will play each other. So pull one of them out. Georgia and Alabama, yes, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive, so you don't have to pull one of them out. But I think right now Oklahoma would be assured of a way into the college football playoff if the season ended today, again, with the caveat that we're going to simulate that Ohio State and Wisconsin game, if that makes sense. I think they would be in right now.
So I want to hear with the college football playoff ranking being released tomorrow night. I believe 7 or 8, not sure. I want to get your top 10, your Bob Long, ESPN Insider top 10. What should we be expecting tomorrow night?
Okay, yeah. The top 10, I believe Alabama will be number 1. I believe Georgia will be number 2.
This is where it gets tricky.
I may be absolutely out of my mind here, but I am going to go take a flyer on the Sooners from Oklahoma, which I could be off
by 3.
I could be off by 4 spots, Tyler. I'm well aware.
I agree.
But
this is where it gets 1 and 2. I think are set in stone.
Then I think
3
it's
and
Ohio
3
State.
through 10 are difficult.
Yep.
Okay.
Then I think Ohio State number 4.
Okay.
And then I think the Notre Dame Fighting Irish number 5.
Okay.
I put Wisconsin back at 6.
Oof.
Clemson at 7. Penn State at 8.
And then can you finish that out?
Can I finish that out?
Go to 10.
Sure. Miami and TCU.
TCU. Okay. And then you probably have OK State, if I'm assuming, right after TCU
Yep,
there.
then Washington, then Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's going to take a nice jump next week when they beat Miami on the road.
Okay. So I have – this is what I think it's going to be. You're persuading me, though, on Oklahoma. I had them a little low here. I have Bama and Georgia, 1 and 2. 3 and 4, I actually have Ohio State at 3. I have Notre Dame at 4. I think they can be flip-flopped.
Very fair.
I think they can be flip-flopped.
I highly doubt that Notre Dame I'm with you. I don't think Notre Dame will jump Ohio State.
Okay. So at 5, and this is actually, it gets tough at 3. I think Ohio State will be 3, but then these next ones get tricky because you have a Wisconsin undefeated team. I'm not as high on Miami as I am Wisconsin. I'm not high really on either, but it's going to be interesting to see where they match them up, and it's also going to be interesting to see where they match up the 1-loss teams. So at 4, I have Notre Dame. At 5, I have Clemson. At 6, I have Wisconsin. And 7, I have Penn State, and I think they can even be flipped. It's a shame that they don't play each other this year. It really is, because I think Penn State beats them handily. I do.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, you saw when they decided to turn it on last year in the championship game, the athletes just took over that game. Granted, that was last year. This is this year. They don't play, and they probably won't play, unfortunately. Then at 8, after Penn State, at 7. At 8, I have Oklahoma, Miami, OK State at 10, with TCU just trailing there. But, you know, you make a valid point about Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting to see where they put them. I think for Penn State fans out there, you're going to be anywhere in between probably 6 and 8. Yep. That's my estimation.
And I have them at 8. I think that's about as low as they can go unless they decide to throw Miami.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they're above Wisconsin either. I wouldn't. I would not be surprised if they're above Wisconsin.
Yeah,
I fully expect them to be above Miami. And I think they're going to be right there alongside Clemson for now. Right now, they're going to be nip and tuck with Clemson.
All right, so here's what we're going to do moving forward, because this is going to be a lot of fun on our future shows. Oh, by the way, Penn State plays Michigan State at noon on Fox this weekend.
There's a pennant.
Brian Lewerke and crew is looking to take down Penn State. But
hopefully
again,
the team's not overlooking that like we just did on the show.
Yeah, I hear you. Win out and hope for help. But what's first on that board? Win out. Got to win out, obviously, and that's number 1. But here's what we're going to do, Tyler, moving forward. We're going to start picking resumes. We're going to pick 2 teams, and we're going to pick a side, and then we're going to have an argument here on the air, a gentle debate and discussion, as if we are, say, the athletic director or the head coach of one of those teams arguing why they should be in the playoff over the other. What do you think? 1 a week? Should be fun.
Sounds good. And we can even leave the name off the resume.
That's not a bad idea.
I like that.
My team is 11-1 and didn't go to a conference championship game, and
right. Especially towards the end of the year, we will really be able to have some fun with that.
We're looking forward.
Things
to
are going to sort themselves out though these next 4 or 5 weeks. I really do believe it's going to be chaotic. It really is. And sometimes, I mean, obviously for Penn State it'd be nice to control your own destiny. It really would. Mm-hmm. But it makes watching these other games quite interesting too. Not that you want your fate in somebody else's hands, but there's a genuine a growing interest in those games, for better or worse. But
listen, Ohio State last year, it was different, but they had no interest in going to that. Once they lost to, or once they beat Michigan, they knew that's what they needed to do. They had no interest in going to that Big Ten championship game because they knew they were in. Not that Penn State will be in that same situation, but there is something to that they don't need to go to Indianapolis if they could find themselves into that discussion at the right time. So if you got something, because I got one more.
I do have. I know we wouldn't talk about Michigan State a little bit. We don't have much time, but I do want to maybe take some guesses here on these big games that are happening this. We got Virginia Tech, Miami.
Yeah.
We have Bedlam, and we have NC State, Clemson. In my opinion, they're the 3 big playoff impacted games for this week.
Sure.
That Penn State's playoff hopes definitely ride on some of those games.
TCU, Texas, by the way.
TCU, Texas as well. So, I mean, any of those games to you jump out as – I know you definitely think Virginia Tech could beat Miami. Outside of that, any game that you think is going to really benefit Penn State this weekend?
Yeah, I like Tom Herman in Texas. I really do.
To knock off TCU?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I like it. They played Oklahoma really tough. They played a couple teams really tough.
That's what I was saying earlier. I think that definitely is going to be a good game.
I want more than anything NC State.
I do too, and I think it might happen.
Kelly Bryant is healthy. I don't.
I called this a couple weeks ago on the air. I called it before Clemson lost to Syracuse in the Carrier Dome. I said no one's going to go undefeated except Alabama. I did say that, and he said, and Bob said, well, actually, I don't know if it was on the air or not. And you said, well, who's Clemson going to lose to? And I said, probably NC State.
Right.
And they lost to Syracuse a couple days after. I still think they might. Yeah, that sounds not as confident, but that's going to be a tough game for Clemson to win. Their offense hasn't looked great this year.
Yeah.
It's going to be a defensive game. And if NC State's in it in the 4th, man, the Wolfpack might pull it out, which would be huge. And that would be the domino. And then everything else is going to continue to fall crazy, and we'll see what happens come December 3rd, I believe, is the college football playoff.
I didn't know if you had anything specific on Michigan State. I mean, another year there. A little bit of, we don't know if we want to call it revenge or not.
Nah.
Penn State exerted that last year on Michigan State for running up the score the prior year. Is Michigan State feeling the same way? I don't think it
I don't
matters.
think
Penn State
so.
needs to go out there and beat teams by double digits every week the rest of the way.
This is an intriguing game to me because both teams are coming off of heartbreaking, hard-fought losses. Obviously, we know what happened in the Penn State game. Michigan State lost a 3 OT game at Northwestern, who's rapidly improving. Michigan State's a hard team to figure out. That game that they won at Michigan is really the only football I've seen them play this year. Their offense still is incredibly stagnant. Their defense is improved. It's going to be a tough game for Penn State because it's 12 o'clock. It's a road game after the Ohio State road game and a Michigan home game. You know, it's the final game of this 3-game stretch. It's going to be interesting to see how Penn State comes out of the gates. They've come out fast all season, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how they come out of the gates. I do think that they win by double digits.
Agreed.
I just don't think that Michigan State has the offensive firepower to really scare Penn State too much. And their defense is solid, but you know, Penn State, as tired as they may be, as drained as they may be coming into this, they have a lot to prove. The season's far from over. I don't see this group of individuals, this team, giving up on a season because they lost one game by 1 point. This football team, this program has been through much worse than a 1-point loss to the number 6 team in the country. So I don't see any let up. Maybe a slow start, but I think they win handily by 10 points. I'll say 33-17.
Okay. I like that pick. I think they win by 17 to 20 points. I think they exert some, not revenge on Michigan State, but I think they get some feeling of relief and getting back to normalcy after that just crushing loss last weekend against Ohio State. So I think they win big. And we come here, start previewing Rutgers, looking at a still one-loss team, primed to make the most of their last 3 games of the regular season.
Absolutely.
Last point on all the things we've talked about. Things I want you to take away, maybe little tidbits. Thank Iowa, the Iowa Hawkeyes, once again, for keeping the Iowa State Cyclones irrelevant. Without that win, we're talking about that team way up there in the college football rankings, but with 2 losses, they're just a disruptor.
Will we be thanking Iowa even more after Saturday? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
They host
Ohio State. But
would that even be a good thing?
Sure. Why not? That gives Ohio State a not a good loss, 2 losses. And you never know what's going to happen at that last game on the road at Michigan.
I think they'd still need one more.
You know, I don't.
I mean, I know they'd need one
to
more
get for the Big Ten championship. Yes, I think it would.
I still.
I don't. No way. If Ohio State lost, and I don't see this happening. I'm just throwing it out there.
They lost one. Won the Big Ten title.
No, I don't think they
losses.
do.
No,
it's the same thing.
It's not the same.
I think it's very. I think it is That's a bad loss at Iowa. It would have been for Penn State this year as well. That would, you know. I mean, if Penn State doesn't win that game, they're done right now, obviously. But
maybe
that we'll save
that. I'd have to think on that one.
That'd be kind of crazy if we have to argue about this on if it actually comes through. I don't think it will. Ohio State will win the game. Just you never know when you go to Iowa. It is not a night game, by the way. It's 3:30, but you never know.
It'll turn into night eventually.
It will, but you never know. It's going to be a wild weekend.
Last week of the regular season, Bryce Love's last stand. If we turn the page 2 weeks from now and Miami has lost to Notre Dame and they go into the last game of the regular season, no 13th data point for them since they're not in a conference. And Stanford is the only thing standing between them and the college football playoff. And Bryce Love, who just sat out last week and has been a little bit banged up with an injury, his last Heisman stand in an otherwise season where Stanford, doesn't really have much to play for, or Stanford beats Washington and can represent the Pac-12 North in the Pac-12 championship game. Bryce Love's last stand. Watch out for it. The Irish could go down in the last weekend of the season.
I don't want to look ahead that far, but I have a really strange feeling these next 4 weeks of the regular season and then the championship weekend. It's going to be probably some of the most exciting football. It really feels, it's so funny, but it feels like the season has finally really started because the college football.
The dominoes started dropping.
It's just going to start, and you just never, I mean, if you look at the history of where teams start in the ranking and end, it's a lot of like jumbling around. So I don't see anything differently happening this year.
9:10, an hour and 10 minutes into this one, no commercial breaks. This is just fun. I mean, it was great to talk to Cory Giger.
I got all night
from the Altoona Mirror. Keep commenting. If you keep commenting, we'll go on. But we'll probably save them for the next show. Tyler, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. A lot of good discussion. Thanks again to Cory Giger from the Altoona Mirror, from 1450 ESPN Radio State College, from 1430 ESPN Radio Altoona for giving us some good, really good nuggets to chew on. And of course, for us just going through this discussion, I had a lot of fun. Thanks to those that commented on Facebook Live, those watching on Periscope, which is on Twitter, and our Twitter handle is @BobLongSports. And thanks to all you that are listening either on YouTube after the fact or on Ustream Live, our traditional medium, back to our roots. But for Tyler, I'm Bob saying so long, and we'll be back next Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. to break down a whole new level of madness. See you then.